I never thought it would take this long. 5 years. 5 years of trying, hoping, crying, and starting over again. There were moments when I thought it would never happen for us. Lucas and I had been through it all, tracking cycles, doctor visits, and endless advice from well-meaning people who had no idea how exhausting it all was. Then, finally, the test was positive. At first, I didn't believe it. I stared at the 2 pink lines as if they might disappear if I blinked too hard. My hands were shaking when I called Lucas into the bathroom. He looked at me, then at the test, then back at me. "Are you serious?" His voice cracked, and I just nodded. That's when we both broke down, laughing and crying at the same time. 12 weeks later, we were sitting in the doctor's office, staring at the ultrasound screen. A tiny, flickering heartbeat. A real baby, our baby, healthy and growing. I squeezed Lucas's hand as relief washed over me. This was real. This was happening. That night, we decided it was finally time to tell our family. We had kept it to ourselves at first, just in case. But now that we knew everything was okay, we wanted to share our happiness. I was nervous, but mostly excited. My parents had always been supportive, and I knew they would be overjoyed. We gathered everyone for dinner at my parents' house, where the atmosphere was warm and familiar. As soon as I told them the news, my mom gasped, covering her mouth with her hands before pulling me into a tight hug. My dad beamed, clapping Lucas on the back. My aunts, uncles, and cousins cheered. It was exactly the reaction I had hoped for. But then, I glanced at my sister, Marina. She was sitting at the other end of the table, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When our mom turned to hug her, Marina let out a small sigh and muttered under her breath, "Well, there goes my moment." At first, I thought I misheard her. I was too caught up in the excitement, the warmth of my mother's embrace, the happy chatter of my family. But then Marina sighed again, louder this time, and muttered, "I guess I'm invisible now." The room didn't exactly go silent, but there was a shift. A slight pause before the conversation picked up again, as if no one wanted to acknowledge the tension she had just created. My mom, ever the peacemaker, reached for Marina's hand. "Oh, sweetheart, you know we're thrilled for you too," she said with a smile, patting her belly as if to remind everyone that Marina was also expecting. Marina forced a tight smile and shrugged, but I could see the stiffness in her posture. I knew my sister well enough to recognize when she felt slighted. She had always had a way of making everything about herself, but I told myself she was just being dramatic. Maybe pregnancy hormones were making her extra sensitive. I decided to brush it off. The last thing I wanted was to get into an argument on what was supposed to be a happy day. Instead, I focused on my parents, on Lucas, on the genuine joy surrounding us. My mom was already talking about baby clothes and names, and my dad was recalling funny childhood stories about me. Marina, meanwhile, sat quietly, barely engaging. Every now and then she would throw in a sarcastic comment, "Wow, it's like the second coming of Christ," or a heavy sigh when someone asked me a question. I tried not to let it bother me. This was a big moment for me and Lucas, and I wasn't going to let my sister ruin it. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, something told me this wasn't over. Marina had always been like this. Even as kids, she had a way of making everything about her. If I got a new toy, she suddenly needed the exact same one. If I was sick, she swore she felt even worse. If our parents praised me for something, she would sulk until they reassured her that she was just as special. It was exhausting. As we grew older, I hoped she would outgrow it, but instead, it just evolved. Marina had always been the center of attention, whether she was throwing tantrums as a child or playing the victim as a teenager. And when she became a mother for the first time, it was as if she had found her ultimate stage. Pregnancy had made her the star of the family. With each child she had, the attention only grew. My parents doted on her, always helping with the kids, always fussing over her needs. And I never minded. I wasn't competing with her. I was happy for her, happy to be the supportive sister, the cool aunt. But now, things were different. This was my first pregnancy. After years of trying, I was finally experiencing something that had always come so easily for her. And maybe, just maybe, for the first time, I was the one in the spotlight. That's what really bothered her. I wasn't trying to overshadow her. I wasn't doing anything except being happy for myself. But in Marina's world, if the attention wasn't on her, it meant it was being stolen. I wanted to believe she would get over it, that she would eventually be happy for me like the rest of our family was. But seeing the way she was acting, how she kept making those little comments, how she refused to engage in the excitement, made me realize that maybe this wasn't just a phase. Maybe, no matter what I did, Marina was never going to be happy for me. The next few weeks should have been full of joy. Lucas and I were finally settling into the reality of expecting a baby, and my parents continued to shower us with love and excitement. But every time we saw Marina, there was this tension. It wasn't outright hostility, at least not at first. It was more like a series of tiny, deliberate cuts. Little comments that seemed harmless on the surface but left a sting when I thought about them later. "She's acting like she's the first woman to ever get pregnant," Marina muttered once when our mom was showing me some baby clothes she had bought. "Wow, already treating her like a queen," she joked another time when my dad insisted I sit down and rest while he brought me a drink. "Oh, I remember my first pregnancy," she said with a smirk during a family dinner. "You think everything is life or death. You'll relax when you have more." At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just Marina being Marina, that she would get over it eventually. But the more she did it, the harder it became to let it go. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way she said them, like she wanted to make sure I never got too comfortable in my happiness. I wasn't asking for special treatment. I wasn't demanding all the attention. I just wanted to enjoy my pregnancy without feeling like I had to apologize for it. Even Lucas started noticing. One night after dinner at my parents' house, as we got into the car, he turned to me and said, "She's really pushing it, huh?" I sighed, leaning my head against the seat. "Yeah." He reached for my hand. "You don't have to let her get to you." I nodded, but it was easier said than done. Because no matter how much I tried to brush it off, there was a part of me that knew this wasn't going to stop. Marina wasn't just annoyed, she was resentful. And sooner or later, this was going to come to a head. The breaking point came at another family dinner. I wasn't expecting anything dramatic, just another evening of dodging Marina's passive-aggressive remarks while trying to enjoy time with my parents. When Lucas and I arrived, my mom greeted me with a wide smile. "There she is," she beamed, reaching out and rubbing my belly gently. "How's my little grandbaby today?" It was such a simple, loving gesture, but the moment it happened, I felt the air shift. Marina, already seated on the couch, rolled her eyes so hard, I thought she might strain something. "You didn't greet me like that," she muttered, arms crossed over her own very pregnant belly. My mom clicked her tongue. "Oh, don't be silly, Marina. You've had 3 babies already. I've rubbed your belly plenty of times." That clearly wasn't the response Marina wanted. She huffed, but didn't push it further. Still, I could see the way she was glaring at me, like I had personally orchestrated the moment to spite her. I tried to focus on the rest of the evening, but the tension lingered. Even when Marina wasn't speaking directly to me, I could feel her watching, waiting for another moment to latch onto. And honestly, I was getting tired of it. This was supposed to be a happy time in my life. I had spent years longing for this, and now that it was finally happening, I felt like I had to tiptoe around my own excitement just to keep my sister from sulking. But the night wasn't over yet, and the worst was still to come. Dinner was winding down, and my parents were clearing the table while the rest of us sat in the living room. Marina's kids were running around, their laughter filling the house. I was used to their energy, boisterous, loud, always in motion. Then, out of nowhere, I felt a sharp thud against my stomach. One of my nephews had swung a plastic toy mallet, hitting me right in the belly. It wasn't excruciating, but it startled me. My hands instinctively went to my stomach as I flinched away. "Hey, careful," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "Don't do that." Before I could even process what had happened, Marina scoffed from across the room. "Oh, for God's sake, get a grip." I turned to look at her, my heart pounding. Not from pain, but from the sheer audacity of her response. "Excuse me?" She shrugged, barely looking up from her phone. "It's a toy, Letitia. He barely tapped you." I felt my face heat up. "I'm pregnant, Marina. I don't want him hitting me in the stomach with anything, toy or not." And then, as if I had just confessed to committing a crime, she rolled her eyes dramatically. "So am I. You don't see me acting pathetic about it." Pathetic. That word stung more than the toy ever could. I took a breath, trying to steady myself. "You're on your 4th child, Marina. This is my 1st. I've waited years for this. Sorry if I'm a little more cautious than you." She let out a sarcastic laugh. "Right, because apparently your pregnancy is so much more important than mine." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. My stomach tightened, and not because of the toy mallet. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I knew that if I said anything else, it would only escalate. I looked at Lucas, who was watching the exchange with clenched jaw. I could tell he wanted to step in, but I shook my head slightly. Not here. Not now. But one thing was clear. This was far from over. I should have let it go. I should have just ignored her, taken a deep breath, and moved on. But after weeks of little digs, of eye rolls and muttered comments, after years of her always making everything about herself, I couldn't. "You know my situation, Marina," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "You know how long I've waited for this. The least you could do is stop acting like I got pregnant just to spite you." Marina scoffed, crossing her arms. "Oh, please. The way this family is acting, you'd think you were carrying the second coming of Christ." The room went silent. I felt something inside me snap. Lucas tensed beside me. My mom's face fell, clearly pained by the way Marina was speaking to me. But Marina? She looked smug, like she had been waiting for this exact reaction. I took a step forward, my hands shaking, not with fear, but with frustration. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I asked, my voice trembling, but not from weakness. "Why can't you just be happy for me? Why does everything have to be a competition with you?" Marina's expression hardened. "Because you're acting like your pregnancy is the most special thing in the world, when it's not. You're not the first woman to get pregnant. It's not that deep." I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. "Wow, you really can't stand it, can you? You can't handle even a second of not being the center of attention." She rolled her eyes again. "Oh, grow up." And that was it. That was the moment I lost whatever restraint I had left. "You're a nasty, petty bitch," I snapped. Marina's eyes widened, not in hurt, but in outrage. Gasps filled the room. My mom let out a quiet, "Leticia," as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. I didn't care. I grabbed my bag, turned to Lucas, and said, "Let's go." I refused to give Marina the satisfaction of another reaction. I just needed to get out of there. The drive home was silent. Lucas kept glancing at me, his hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than usual. I stared out the window, replaying the scene over and over in my head. My heart was still racing, my hands still shaking. I had never spoken to Marina like that before. We had fought plenty of times growing up, but this was different. This wasn't about borrowing clothes or who got the bigger slice of cake. This was real. This was years of resentment boiling over. Lucas finally broke the silence. "You okay?" I let out a shaky breath. "I don't know." He nodded, like he understood. She was out of line. She always is. I laughed bitterly, rubbing my temples. But calling her a bitch? Maybe I took it too far. Lucas didn't answer right away. Maybe, he admitted. But if anyone deserved it, it was her. That should have made me feel better, but it didn't. When we got home, I saw my phone light up with a dozen messages. Some from my mom, a few from other family members. I didn't even bother opening them. I knew exactly what they would say. My mom was probably upset, begging me to fix things. Some relatives would take my side, others would take Marina's. The usual family politics. But I didn't want to deal with any of it. Not tonight. I turned off my phone, curled up next to Lucas on the couch, and let the exhaustion of the night take over. I wasn't ready to talk to Marina. I wasn't even sure if I wanted to. All I knew was that for once, I had stood up for myself. And no matter what anyone else said, I wasn't sure I regretted it. By the next morning, my phone was still buzzing with messages. I ignored most of them until my mom called, her third attempt since last night. I sighed and finally answered. "Letitia," she said, her voice tired. "Can we talk?" I already knew where this was going. "If this is about Marina?" "She's really upset," my mom interrupted gently. "She said you humiliated her in front of everyone." I almost laughed. Humiliated her? As if she hadn't spent weeks making snide comments about my pregnancy, belittling my feelings, acting like I was stealing something from her. "She's upset?" I repeated, rubbing my temples. "Mom, she's been awful to me this entire time. You saw it. Everyone saw it." My mom sighed. "I know, sweetheart, and I understand why you snapped. But calling her She hesitated. "You know what you called her? It just made things worse." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "So what? I'm supposed to apologize?" "She's your sister," my mom said simply. "And I don't want this fight to ruin our family." I closed my eyes, trying to push down the frustration bubbling up again. It was always like this. Marina caused the problem, but I was the one expected to fix it, to be the bigger person. "I need time," I finally said. "I'm not going to pretend she didn't hurt me, and I'm not going to reach out just because she's playing the victim now." My mom sighed again, but she didn't push. "Just think about it, okay?" I muttered a goodbye and hung up, tossing my phone onto the couch. Lucas walked into the room, raising an eyebrow. "Let me guess, your mom wants you to fix everything?" I nodded, exhaling. "Yep." He sat beside me, taking my hand. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to." I squeezed his fingers, grateful for his support. But deep down, I knew the question would keep nagging at me. Had I really gone too far? Or was I finally just standing up for myself? I've spent the last few days replaying everything in my head, wondering if I overreacted. Maybe I shouldn't have snapped. Maybe I should have just ignored Marina's comments, let them roll off my back like I always did. But why should I have to? She spent weeks making me feel like I was wrong for being happy. She made my pregnancy, the one thing I had waited years for, feel like something I had to downplay, just to keep her from throwing a tantrum. And when I finally stood up for myself, I became the villain. I get it. I called her a bitch in front of our family. Not my proudest moment. But after everything she said to me, after the way she treated me, can anyone really blame me? And the worst part? She still hasn't reached out. Not to apologize. Not to talk. Nothing. My mom keeps checking in, dropping hints that I should be the one to fix things. But I don't see why I should be the one to make the first move. If Marina really cared, if she really wanted to mend things, she would reach out too. Lucas tells me I don't owe her anything, that I should focus on my own happiness, on my pregnancy, on our future. And I want to. I really do. But there's still this little voice in the back of my mind making me wonder, did I cross a line? So now I'm turning to you. Was I wrong? Was I too harsh? Or was I justified in finally standing up for myself? I just wanted to enjoy my pregnancy without feeling like I had to shrink myself down for her sake. But maybe I let my frustration get the best of me. Maybe I should have handled it differently. Or maybe, for once, I wasn't the problem. I'll let you decide.